Welcome to the Deep Dive, your essential shortcut to navigating that just overwhelming ocean of information that washes over us every single day.
It really is a lot, isn't it? Articles, research notes.
Exactly. And we're here to take all that stack of papers, those interesting studies, maybe even your own scattered notes, and really distill them down.
Get to those crucial nuggets, right? The aha moments.
Yeah, those moments that turn all that raw data into, genuine understanding, and hopefully do it all without you feeling overwhelmed.
Think of us as guides for your information journey. We're here to help cut through the noise, really understand the most important insights.
And maybe discover some surprising facts along the way.
Yeah.
Stuff that makes you not just informed, but well-informed, ready to engage with what's cutting edge and really relevant.
Definitely.
And today, our mission is to jump into a really fascinating deep dive. We're exploring this revolutionary intersection of technology and medicine.
Digital endpoints.
Digital endpoints, exactly. We're going to walk through a specific kind of groundbreaking roadmap to understand how these cutting-edge digital health measures, the kind of often collected by a wearable device on your wrist or maybe your ankle.
Stuff we see becoming more common.
Right.
Yeah.
How these are moving from just being interesting data points, maybe something researchers looked at on the side.
To becoming fully accepted, absolutely critical tools.
Well, critical for drug development. And this is key for regulatory approval. This isn't just about cool gadgets. It's genuinely about changing how we prove a medicine actually works.
And our guide for this, our source material, it's exceptionally insightful. We're pulling from excerpts of Digital Endpoints, a roadmap to regulatory acceptance.
Okay.
Specifically, an article by McCarthy and colleagues published in Therapeutic Innovation and Regulatory Science. That was back in July 2023.
So pretty recent stuff.
Very recent. And this paper, it's not just, a list of facts. It provides this really detailed framework, almost like a playbook.
Playbook, I like that.
Yeah, showing us exactly how these innovations are navigating the incredibly rigorous paths of medical science and regulatory bodies, like the European Medicines Agency, the EMA.
Which is a big one.
A very big one. It's a real testament to how scientific rigor is meeting practical application head-on.
Okay, so let's start with the basics, maybe. Why are digital endpoints such a big deal right now? What's the initial spark here? Why should we be paying attention?
Well, at their core, they promise something really transformative.
Which is?
Continuous real-world data collection.
Okay, continuous real-world. Let's break that down. What's the usual way?
Think about a traditional clinical trial. A patient, they might go into a clinic, once every few months?
Sounds about right. Maybe more, maybe less, but infrequent.
Right. And during that visit, the doctor takes a snapshot, a single measurement of their walking speed maybe, or they fill out a questionnaire about symptoms.
Like a photo. Just one moment in time.
Exactly. And it's often under kind of artificial conditions, right? Like walking down a perfectly flat, empty clinic hallway. Not exactly real life.
That makes sense. It's a tiny window into their condition.
And that's the limitation. Those snapshots, while they're valuable, don't get me wrong, they are inherently episodic.
Episodic, okay.
They might miss subtle changes happening day to day, or how a patient functions at home versus in that clinic setting. What if they have a really good day when they visit, or a really bad one?
Yeah, that single snapshot might not truly represent their overall experience, their average day.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with the potential of, say, a wearable device.
Like a fitness tracker, but maybe more sophisticated.
Exactly. This isn't just about that brief clinic visit. It's about potentially constant objective monitoring. From a device that could track your steps, your sleep, maybe even your gait patterns.
All day, every day.
Potentially, yeah. In your natural environment, at home, at work, going about your life.
Okay, that sounds vastly different. Continuous, real world.
And that offers vastly enhanced sensitivity compared to those traditional episodic clinical assessments.
So instead of that single photo,
you're getting a continuous, high-definition video almost of a patient's functional health as it's truly lived.
That sounds incredibly powerful.
The potential is immense. It offers a much richer, more nuanced, and importantly, objective picture of a patient's health journey.
Objective being key there, I imagine. Less about how someone feels they did, more about the actual data.
That's a big part of it. It helps track how a disease or a treatment is impacting their daily function in a quantifiable way. But, and this is the big but,
There's always a but.
There's the big question. How do we make absolutely sure that these measurements collected by these, advanced tools in the real world,
The data from the wearables.
yeah, how do we make sure that data is truly meaningful?
Meaningful. Meaningful to who?
Both. Meaningful to the patients living with the condition and meaningful to the regulators, the ones who need to approve these potentially life-changing new drugs based on this data.
Ah, okay. So it's not just about collecting tons of data.
Not at all. It's about understanding what that data actually signifies. Does a change in the numbers translate to a real, tangible impact on someone's quality of life, on their ability to function?
That's where it gets really interesting, isn't it? Bridging the tech and the human experience.
Exactly. It's where the science has to be incredibly rigorous.
So we've touched on this huge potential, but also this core challenge, defining meaningful change. Let's really dig into that. What are these digital health technologies, these DHTs more formally, and why is nailing down this meaningful change idea so absolutely pivotal?
Okay, so fundamentally, digital health technologies, or DHTs, they're tools like wearables, smart sensors, maybe even smartphone apps.
Things that collect health data.
Right. They're the sophisticated hardware and software that basically bridge the gap between our physical selves and the digital world.
Capturing what? Movement, vitals.
All sorts of things. Subtle movement patterns, physiological responses like heart rate, sometimes even environmental factors. They give us a window into a patient's daily life that honestly was unimaginable just a short while ago.
And the core advantage, as we said, is that continuous real-world measurement.
Right. Take, for example, a patient with a condition like Parkinson's or MS. Traditionally, a clinician might test their walking speed or dexterity maybe every 3 or 6 months.
The snapshot again.
A snapshot. It's like trying to understand a whole river by looking at one photo of one spot on the bank.
Okay, good analogy.
With DHTs, you're potentially getting this continuous flow of data. You can see how that patient's walking changes not just month to month, but maybe hour to hour, day to day.
How it's affected by things like fatigue or medication timing.
Exactly. Or different environments, walking on carpet versus pavement. Information that's just impossible to get from those infrequent clinic visits.
It captures the natural ups and downs of life.
Yes, the natural variability. And that offers an enhanced sensitivity that those traditional snapshots just can't match. You're not just seeing the tip of the iceberg anymore.
You're seeing the whole thing moving, changing.
The entire dynamic structure beneath the surface, yeah.
So connecting this to you, the listener, why should this matter? What's the bigger picture impact?
Well, imagine a world where medical trials aren't just about those infrequent clinic visits and maybe somewhat subjective patient reports.
Okay.
Instead, they're about understanding continuously and objectively how a treatment truly impacts daily life.
Like, does this new drug actually help someone walk to the kitchen easier? Or climb stairs?
Precisely. Or even just get up from a chair after resting. What about their sleep quality, their activity levels throughout the entire week, not just for 10 minutes in a clinic?
That sounds like information patients would really care about.
Absolutely. This is the potential digital endpoints unlock. A direct, objective, and incredibly comprehensive window into real-world impact. It can tell us not just if a drug works, but how it works in a patient's actual life.
And for drug developers, what's the benefit for them?
Huge benefits. It could mean detecting signs of efficacy or effectiveness much earlier, or maybe understanding specific patient subgroups better, who responds best.
And for patients participating in trials?
It could mean trials that are less burdensome, maybe fewer clinic visits, and provide insights that feel more relevant to their daily struggles and goals.
Okay, the potential is clear, but you mentioned a hurdle. The regulatory challenge.
Right, that's the big one. For these digital endpoints to really achieve regulatory acceptance.
Acceptance by bodies like the EMA or FDA.
Exactly. Especially if we're making those crucial label claims. That means the drug can be officially marketed as treating a specific symptom or slowing disease progression based on the digital endpoint data.
That's the ultimate goal for a drug company, right? Getting that claim approved.
It is. And to get there, these digital endpoints need to be built on something incredibly robust.
Which is?
Quantifiable, population-specific, meaningful change thresholds, MCTs.
Meaningful change thresholds, MCTs. Okay, that sounds important.
It's critical. It's not enough to just measure any change the device picks up. You need to know scientifically if that change actually matters to a patient's life.
Matters in a way that patients themselves would recognize as important.
Exactly. And in a way that satisfies the regulators who make the final call on approving that drug. This is where the science gets incredibly demanding.
So an MCT, The definition, according to your source.
The source defines it precisely as the magnitude of change in an endpoint measure perceived as important to patients.
Perceived as important to patients. That patient-centric view seems key.
It's absolutely critical. It moves us beyond just looking at statistical significance.
Meaning?
Well, a change might be statistically detectable, meaning it's probably not just random chance, but if it doesn't translate into a real-world improvement that a patient actually perceives as beneficial,
then its value is limited.
Its true value in drug development, and certainly for regulatory approval, becomes questionable. So this raises a really important and complex question.
How do you quantify something that seems kind of subjective, like important to patients?
Right. How do you do that in a way that satisfies both scientific rigor and regulatory demands? This is where the science has to be really innovative. It requires blending hard quantitative data with qualitative insights from patients themselves.
Okay, so that's the challenge. How do you actually do it? How do you establish these meaningful change thresholds? Does the source give us a roadmap for that?
It absolutely does, and it's quite brilliant, really. It outlines 3 complementary frameworks, 3 different approaches for deriving these MCTs.
Complementary meaning they work together.
Exactly. They aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, the real power comes from combining them.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first framework is called anchor-based approaches.
Anchor-based? Like anchoring a ship?
Sort of. The concept is quite elegant. You relate the changes you see in your new digital measure.
The data from the wearable?
Yes. You relate that to established, well-understood clinical anchors.
Anchors being?
These are typically traditional outcome measures. Things clinicians and patients have been using for years and already recognized as important indicators of health or disease progression.
Ah, so you're tying the new digital measure to something familiar and trusted.
Precisely. It's like having a brand new, super precise digital thermometer. To convince people it's accurate, you calibrate its readings against a trusted, traditional mercury thermometer that everyone already understands and relies on.
You're building a bridge of understanding.
You got it. Building that bridge between the new tech and the established knowledge.
Does the paper give an example?
A fantastic one from the Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy, or DMD, case study we'll dive into more later.
Okay.
They looked at changes in a specific digital measure called SV95C. We'll unpack that acronym soon.
SV95C. Got it.
And they anchored changes in SV95C to things like patient or clinician global improvement scales.
Like asking the doctor or patient, overall, how much has the patient improved or worsened?
Exactly. A common one is the Clinical Global Impression Change, or CGIC score. It's a subjective scale, maybe 1 to 7, rating overall change. It gives that big picture assessment.
Okay, what else do they anchor it to?
They also anchored SV95C to established functional tests, like the 6-minute walk test, the 6MWT.
I've heard of that one. How far can you walk in 6 minutes?
That's the one. It's a common objective measure of functional mobility. And the source points out a really strong correlation around 0.8.
0.8. That sounds high in statistical terms.
Yeah, it's very high. It means that changes in the digital SV95C measure tracked very closely with the changes seen in those global impression scores and the 6-minute walk test results.
So if SV95C went up, the patient likely felt better or walked further.
Generally, yes. It showed that what the digital measure was picking up really aligned with what clinicians and patients were seeing as overall improvement or decline. It validates the digital measure against known quantities.
Okay, that makes sense. Anchor-based approaches? What's the second framework?
The second one involves distribution-based methods. These are more statistical.
Okay, getting into the numbers now.
Right. These methods focus on the internal characteristics of the digital measure itself. The main idea is to use statistical metrics to identify a threshold for change that clearly exceeds the inherent measurement noise.
Measurement noise.
Yeah, every measurement, no matter how precise your device, has some degree of natural variability or random fluctuation. Tiny ups and downs that aren't real changes, just, slight variations.
Like static on a radio.
Good analogy. You want to filter out that static to hear the clear signal. These methods help you filter out that measurement noise to find true, impactful change.
What kind of statistical terms are we talking about here?
Key terms include things like standard deviation, or SD, that tells you how spread out the measurements are. Then there's the standard error of measurement, SEM, that estimates how much error is inherent in any single score.
Okay.
And critically, there's the minimum detectable change, or MDC.
Minimum detectable change. That sounds like what we're after.
It's a big piece of it. The MDC is the smallest change in a score that you can be confident is real change, something beyond that expected measurement error or noise. It's the smallest change that isn't just random fluctuation.
So applying this to the Duchenne example, the SV95C measure.
Yes. For SV95C and DMD, they calculated the minimum detectable change, the MDC, to be approximately 0.096 meters per second.
Wow, that's specific, 0.096 meters.
Very precise. And based on calculations like this, along with the anchor data, they then defined a clinically meaningful decline for patients. It landed within a specific range, -0.10 to -0.2 meters per second.
So a drop of 0.1 meters or more in their SV95C was considered meaningful deterioration.
Exactly. It wasn't just a vague feeling of getting worse. It became a precise, scientifically derived numerical target. This helps set a really objective bar for what constitutes an impactful change in the digital data.
Moving beyond subjective interpretation to something quantifiable.
That's the goal.
Okay, so we have anchor-based and distribution-based methods. What's the third framework?
The third one brings in crucial human insight. It uses expert consensus or Delphi panels.
Delphi panels, like the Oracle of Delphi.
Maybe distantly related in concept. The idea is that while data and statistics are fundamental, they don't always capture the full, nuanced reality of lived experience.
So you need to talk to people.
You need to talk to the right people, systematically. These panels gather a diverse group of stakeholders.
Who's involved?
Clinicians who treat these patients every day, the patients themselves who live with the condition, and often their caregivers, who see the daily struggles and triumphs firsthand.
Bringing all those perspectives together.
Right. And they work through a structured, often iterative process. The Delphi method often involves rounds of anonymous feedback and refinement to build a consensus.
A consensus on what?
On what truly constitutes a meaningful change from their collective perspectives, what magnitude of change in walking speed or whatever the endpoint measures would actually make a noticeable difference in daily life.
So this is where the real-world experience and clinical judgment really get integrated.
Exactly. It rigorously brings those diverse qualitative perspectives into the scientific process. It acknowledges that meaning isn't just hidden in the numbers, it's also deeply rooted in human experience.
And you said these three approaches are complementary. How does that work?
This is a crucial point from the source material. The most robust, the most scientifically valid threshold definition doesn't come from relying on just one of these methods in isolation.
You need all three.
Ideally, yes. It comes from what the paper calls multi-stakeholder triangulation.
Triangulation, like finding a position using 3 points.
Precisely. You combine and compare the insights you get from all three approaches. The anchor-based methods link the new measure to the old trusted ones. The distribution-based methods quantify change beyond noise. And the expert consensus grounds everything in human experience and clinical reality.
So you're looking for convergence, where the different methods point to a similar threshold.
Yes, that's the ideal scenario. It's like viewing an object through three different lenses, each gives a unique perspective. But when they all converge, you get a complete, robust, and much more indisputable picture of what constitutes meaningful change.
That synergy must dramatically strengthen the scientific validity.
Absolutely, and it builds regulatory confidence.
What's really fascinating here, I think, is that blend. It's not just hard data, it's science meeting real-world experience.
That's it, exactly. It's not just about the raw numbers from a device or the output of a statistical model. It's about what those numbers mean to the people living with the condition every day and what they mean to the clinicians trying to improve their lives.
So this holistic, triangulated approach ensures that the meaningful change threshold isn't just some abstract concept for statisticians.
Right. It makes it something truly grounded in patient experience and clinical reality. And that makes it immensely powerful for drug development and getting regulatory approval.
Okay, this is fascinating background. Now, let's ground it even more. Let's talk about that precedent-setting journey you mentioned, the case study of SV95C in Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy.
Yes, this is where all these concepts, the DHTs, the validation, the MCTs, the triangulation really come to life. It shows how a digital measure can go from just a promising idea
to a fully validated, regulatory accepted primary endpoint, which is huge.
It's a landmark case. It really involved meticulous science, incredible persistence, and a lot of collaboration.
So first off, what exactly is SV95C again? You mentioned the acronym.
Right. SV95C stands for the 95th percentile stride velocity.
95th percentile.
Yeah.
So not average speed.
No, not average. Imagine you're walking, your speed naturally varies a bit, stride to stride. You might slow down, then speed up. The 95th percentile stride velocity focuses on your faster, more robust strides during periods of walking.
Why the faster ones?
The thinking is that it captures a measure closer to peak performance during ambulation. It might better reflect the maximal functional ability a patient has at that time, which often relates more closely to underlying motor function changes than just average speed.
Okay, captures peak ability. And how is it measured?
It's derived from data collected by small, unobtrusive, ankle-worn wearables.
So sensors strapped to the ankle?
Yes, small devices worn discreetly. They can blend into a patient's daily life, allowing for that continuous real-world monitoring without requiring trips to a clinic just for the measurement.
And the initial focus group for this?
Initially, it was focused on ambulatory DMD patients, meaning those still able to walk independently, aged 5 years and older.
That specific population is important, I guess.
Very important. DMD is progressive, so different measures are needed for different stages. But what happened next with SV95C's qualification process, that's really a story of elevation within the regulatory world.
It wasn't an overnight success.
Definitely not. It was a multi-year effort, building trust, demonstrating value piece by piece.
Tell us about that journey. What was the first big step?
The first major milestone came in 2019. SV95C received qualification from the EMA, the European Medicines Agency.
Okay, that's significant.
It was qualified as a secondary endpoint.
Secondary. What does that mean in practice?
It means it was accepted as a measure that could provide useful, supportive evidence for a drug's effect in trials for ambulatory DMD patients, age 5 and up.
So, good data to have, but not the main thing.
Exactly. A secondary endpoint isn't the primary measure used to determine if a drug gets approved. It's important, it adds to the picture, but it's not the definitive proof the regulators base their main decision on.
Like being a strong supporting actor, you said earlier.
Right, not the lead role yet, but it was a crucial first step, acknowledging the measure's utility and potential.
Okay, so 2019, secondary endpoint. That's a foot in the door. What happened next?
Then you fast forward to July 2023, just last year, and something truly monumental happened, a real game changer.
Go on.
SV95C was elevated by the EMA to qualify as a primary endpoint.
Primary endpoint. Okay, let's unpack this because you emphasized it before. This is a huge leap, right?
It's a massive leap. A primary endpoint is the main measure that a clinical trial is designed around. It's the outcome that a drug must demonstrate a statistically significant and clinically meaningful positive effect on to gain regulatory approval for that specific claim.
So the EMA was basically saying, yes, this digital measure, SV95C, is robust enough, sensitive enough, and meaningful enough that we can base drug approval decisions on it.
Precisely. For DMD trials in patients 4 years and older now.
Wow. That signals a whole new era for digital measures, doesn't it? It shows top regulators are willing to embrace this technology not just as supportive, but as foundational evidence.
It absolutely does. It's saying digital real-world data can be the primary proof of whether a drug works. That's not just a game changer for digital health companies.
It's huge for pharma companies developing drugs.
And most importantly, for patients waiting for new therapies. It potentially speeds everything up. It really opens the floodgates for a new kind of evidence in clinical trials.
So how do they get there? From secondary to primary? That must have involved some incredibly rigorous work.
Oh, absolutely. It's a testament to the incredibly rigorous validation process they undertook. They had to prove its worth again and again, both analytically and clinically.
Okay, let's break that down. What's involved in analytical validation?
Analytical validation focuses on the technical performance of the technology itself. Does the device and its algorithm accurately and reliably capture the intended physiological measure? Is the tool itself working correctly?
Accuracy and reliability of the tech. Got it. What did they find for SV95C?
The numbers are genuinely impressive. For accuracy, the source states 98.7% stride detection accuracy.
98.7%. Compared to what?
Compared to motion capture systems. That's basically the gold standard for measuring movement in a controlled lab setting using specialized cameras and markers. So SV95C was nearly perfect at just identifying individual strides.
Okay, that's very accurate stride detection. What about the actual velocity measurement?
Even more striking, maybe? SV95C, measured in the real world, matched the results of a clinical 6-minute walk test done in the clinic within a tiny 0.24% margin in these ambulatory DMD patients.
0.24%. That's incredibly close alignment between the wearables data and the traditional clinic test.
It's remarkable. It shows incredible precision and demonstrates that the digital measure is capturing something very, very similar to the established trusted clinical measure, but doing it continuously in the real world.
That kind of accuracy must build huge confidence.
It does, and it also suggests you could potentially streamline data collection, maybe reduce the need for some of those burdensome clinic visits just for the walk test.
Okay, so accuracy is high. What about reliability? Does it measure consistently?
Reliability is about consistency. If you measure the same thing twice under the same conditions, do you get pretty much the same result?
Like stepping on a good scale every day.
Exactly. For SV95C, the month-to-month reliability was assessed using something called the Interclass Correlation Coefficient, or ICC. The ICC was 0.97.
0.97. How good is that?
Yeah.
ICC ranges from 0 to 1, right?
Right, with 1 being perfect reliability. So 0.97 is exceptionally high. It means the measurement is incredibly consistent over time.
And that's crucial for trials tracking small changes.
Absolutely. The source notes this 0.97 ICC is comparable to, or maybe even superior to, the reliability of traditional tests like the 6-MWT or another one called the North Star Ambulatory Assessment, the NSAA.
The NSAA, what's that?
It's a common functional assessment scale used for ambulatory DMD patients. It involves observing them perform tasks like standing up, walking, climbing stairs, jumping.
Okay, so SV95C is as reliable or more reliable than these standard tests.
That's what the data showed. That level of consistency is absolutely key if you want a measure that can reliably track subtle disease progression or treatment effects over months or years.
They must have also looked at variability in whether patients actually wore the devices, right? Real-world challenges.
Critically important. It's one thing for a device to work well in a lab, quite another for it to perform consistently when worn by real patients living their lives.
So wear time.
Yes,
Yeah.
They established a critical wear time requirement. Patients needed to wear the device for at least 50 hours per week.
Why 50 hours?
To keep the variability in the SV95C data down to 7% or less. This ensures you're getting enough data consistently throughout the week to make stable, meaningful assessments. It minimizes the chance that a change you see is just because you didn't capture enough walking data that week.
Okay, need enough data for stability. Did patients actually meet that requirement? Compliance can be tricky.
This is another impressive finding. Over 88% of the patients in the studies met or actually exceeded 180 hours of recorded wear time over a 30-day period.
Wow, that's much more than the 50 hours week target. That's excellent compliance.
Exceptional compliance for continuous monitoring in a trial setting. It demonstrates the technology wasn't just accurate and reliable, but also practical and user-friendly enough for patients to wear consistently. That real-world feasibility is paramount for long-term studies.
Okay, so the analytical validation looks incredibly strong. Accurate, reliable, feasible. What about the clinical validation? Proving it's actually meaningful for DMD.
Right. Clinical validation moves beyond the tech itself to prove the measure is clinically meaningful and relevant to the disease and its progression in patients.
How do you show that?
Several ways. First, they showed convergent validity.
Convergent validity.
Yeah, they demonstrated those strong correlations we mentioned earlier between SV95C and other established clinical measures, the 6-MWT, the NSAA, another one called the 4-stair climb test, and they showed this across multiple time points in the studies.
So it consistently tracks along with other tools known to measure DMD progression.
Exactly. It shows SV95C is indeed measuring what it's supposed to measure in the context of DMD function. It's like showing a new economic indicator moves in lockstep with established market indexes. It tells you it's tracking the right phenomenon.
Makes sense. What else for clinical validation?
Known groups of validity. This tests whether the measure can effectively tell the difference between groups that are known to be different.
Like patients versus healthy people.
Precisely. And SV95C did this very effectively. It clearly distinguished the DMD patients from healthy controls. The average SV95C for DMD patients was around 1.56 meters per second, while for healthy controls it was much higher, around 2.71 meters per second.
That's a big difference. Clearly separates the groups.
A very clear, statistically significant difference. It proves the measure's ability to identify the disease state, which is a fundamental requirement for any clinical tool.
Okay, convergent validity, known groups validity. What else? This sounds like where the real power might lie.
Yes, perhaps the most powerful aspect of the clinical validation and where digital endpoints often really shine is sensitivity to change.
Sensitivity to change. How well does it pick up actual changes over time?
Exactly. Can it detect meaningful changes, whether those are improvements due to a treatment or declines due to the natural progression of the disease? And crucially, how quickly can it detect them compared to older methods?
And this is where SV95C really stood out.
Dramatically. Here's where it gets really interesting and profoundly impactful.
Lay it on us.
SV95C detected improvements in patients receiving steroid treatment, a standard therapy for DMD, very quickly. Specifically, it picked up an average improvement of 0.09 meters per second in just 3 months.
3 months. That sounds fast for seeing a change in a condition like DMD.
It's incredibly fast feedback in a clinical trial setting for this disease. Think about that from a trial perspective.
Yeah.
Knowing if a treatment is having a measurable effect in a third of the time, maybe even less, compared to waiting for changes on traditional measures.
That could speed up decisions immensely. Did it also pick up worsening?
Yes, and this is also very important. It also showed declines over time in patients who were on a stable treatment regimen.
Why is that significant?
It indicates SV95C's ability to track the subtle underlying disease progression, even when you might not expect a big change, or when traditional measures might be too blunt, too insensitive to pick it up yet.
Like a highly sensitive smoke detector picking up faint smoke long before a standard one goes off.
Good analogy again. And here's the critical part, the real headline for sensitivity. Changes in SV95C, both improvements and declines, were detectable as early as 3 months.
3 months, compared to what for the standard tests?
Compared to needing maybe 9 months or even longer to confidently detect similar changes using standard endpoints like the 6-minute walk test or the NSAA and DMD trials.
Wow. Detecting change potentially 3 times faster.
That significantly accelerated timeline has profound implications.
For who?
For everyone involved. For patients and their families, imagine knowing much sooner if a trial medication is actually helping. It allows for quicker decisions, maybe switching therapies sooner if something isn't working, or just reducing that agonizing waiting period.
Less uncertainty, faster feedback.
Right. And for the pharmaceutical companies running the trials, imagine designing studies that are significantly shorter.
Saves time, saves money.
A lot of time and a lot of money, but more importantly, it means they could potentially test more drug candidates, accelerate the entire development pipeline, and bring effective therapies to market much, much faster.
Getting treatments to patients sooner.
That's the ultimate goal. This isn't just an incremental improvement in measurement. It's a fundamental shift in the speed and efficiency of clinical research for conditions like DMD.
Okay, the validation sounds incredibly thorough, analytical and clinically, especially that sensitivity to change. But getting regulatory acceptance, especially for a primary endpoint, isn't just about the data, right? It involves interacting with the regulators themselves.
Absolutely. This kind of groundbreaking advancement doesn't happen in a vacuum. It relies heavily on constant iterative engagement with the regulatory agencies.
Like the EMA in this case.
Yes. And the regulatory feedback SV95C received along its journey provides incredible insights. It really sets important precedents and acts as a kind of blueprint for others trying to get digital measures accepted.
It wasn't just submitting data and hoping for the best.
Not at all. It was clearly a continuous dialogue over several years.
Can we see evidence of that dialogue in the documents?
We can. Looking back at the earlier feedback, from the 2018 EMA opinion when SV95C was qualified as a secondary endpoint.
Okay, the first step.
The EMA stated directly, and I'm quoting roughly from the summaries, that SV95C is an acceptable secondary endpoint when measured by a valid and suitable wearable device. So that was positive recognition.
One loss.
But they also provided very constructive feedback. They noted something like, although promising, more robust data could be beneficial.
Asking for more evidence.
Specifically, they called for strengthening the long-term correlation of SV95C with functional tests, and supporting the justification of the clinical relevance of the proposed MCID. MCID is minimum clinically important difference, very closely related to the MCT meaningful change threshold.
So even in 2018, they were pushing for stronger proof of that long-term connection to function and clearer justification for what constitutes a meaningful change.
Exactly. And this is crucial. It shows regulators aren't just passive gatekeepers. They provide clear, actionable guidance. They point out where the evidence needs bolstering. It's a collaborative push for scientific rigor.
Challenging the researchers to make the case even stronger.
Right. And clearly that feedback was taken on board and addressed in the subsequent research and submissions.
Because the later affirmation in July 2023 was the complete game changer, leading to primary endpoint qualification.
It was. The qualification documents and related publications explicitly state things like, again paraphrasing the sentiment, the EMA qualification of SV95C illustrates the willingness of regulators to accept novel digital endpoints for drug approval, setting an important precedent.
Setting a precedent. That's a powerful statement. It's not just about this one measure for DMD anymore.
No, it sends a strong signal to the entire pharmaceutical and digital health industry. The door is open. There's now a clear, albeit rigorous, path forward for well-validated digital measures to achieve the highest level of regulatory acceptance.
What were the key insights highlighted in that 2023 qualification?
They explicitly reaffirmed SV95C's ability to detect change earlier and more sensitively than the conventional measures. That's the core value proposition being officially recognized.
The speed and sensitivity.
Yes, that ability to provide precise, timely, objective data reflecting real-world impact. And critically, they now had that finally defined, accepted, clinically meaningful change threshold for SV95C decline.
The MCT we talked about earlier.
Exactly. That range of 1 meter 0.10 to minus 0.2 meters per second. This isn't just an abstract research number anymore. It's a tangible, quantifiable threshold accepted by regulators to define real-world impact for patients with DMD.
Providing a clear target for drug developers and a benchmark for clinicians.
Precisely. So if you connect this all back to the bigger picture, the whole SV95C journey provides a concrete blueprint. Not just for DMD, but potentially for how other digital endpoints, maybe for Parkinson's, maybe for heart failure, maybe for COPD.
How they can navigate this complex regulatory landscape.
It truly sets a clear, achievable path, demonstrating what good looks like in this space.
Okay, so building directly on this incredible success story, the source material, the McCarthy paper, must distill some key recommendations, right? Lessons learned for anyone else trying to get a digital endpoint accepted.
It does. It offers critical advice based on this pioneering journey. This is essentially the path forward.
What's recommendation number 1?
First, always ensure a clear definition of the concept of interest your measure is capturing.
Be specific about what you're measuring.
Extremely specific. For SV95C, it wasn't just walking speed, it was the 95th percentile gait velocity during ambulation. That precision is foundational. Without that clarity, validation becomes impossible. It's like trying to hit a target you haven't clearly defined.
Okay, clear definition first. What's second?
Second, rigorous validation is absolutely non-negotiable.
Both kinds we discussed, analytical and clinical.
Both. You need the analytical validation proving the device itself is accurate and reliable. And you need the clinical validation proving the measure is meaningful and relevant in the context of the disease and for the patients it's intended for.
And following established frameworks. You mentioned V3 earlier.
Exactly. Adhering to established frameworks like the V3 framework verification, validation, and usability provides a structured approach that regulators recognize and expect. It covers the technical performance verification, the clinical accuracy validation, and the real-world practicality for users, usability. It's not just a suggestion, it's basically a requirement.
Got it. Rigorous V3 validation. Third recommendation.
Third, and maybe one of the absolute biggest takeaways from this whole deep dive, the imperative to establish the meaningful change threshold, MCT.
And doing it the right way.
Doing it using that powerful multi-stakeholder triangulation approach we discussed, combining the anchor-based, the distribution-based, and the expert consensus methods.
Why is that triangulation so crucial again?
Because it provides the strongest possible scientific validity. It builds confidence with regulators because you're not relying on just one piece of evidence, but multiple converging lines of proof that all point towards what level of change truly matters.
Makes the case much more compelling. Okay, fourth point.
Fourth, you need to provide clear wear time thresholds for the device.
The minimum amount of time patients need to wear it for good data.
Yes. This is vital for managing data quality and minimizing variability when you're collecting data out in the real world. Remember the 50 hours per week needed for SV95C to keep variability low?
And the fact that patients actually exceeded that.
Right. That kind of clear guidance for patients and study sites, plus demonstrating that patients can meet it, is essential. It ensures the data collected is consistently robust, stable, and interpretable. Without sufficient, consistent wear time, even the best sensor gives you fragmented, potentially unreliable data.
Okay, wear time thresholds. What's the final key recommendation?
Finally, early and continuous regulatory dialogue is paramount.
Talk to the regulators early and often.
Absolutely. It shouldn't be a one-and-done submission at the very end. You need to start discussions with bodies like the EMA or FDA early in the development process.
Even before big trials start.
Ideally, yes. And then continue that dialogue, integrating their feedback into your development plans and submissions along the way. It's a collaborative process, not an adversarial one.
Why is that so important?
Regulators actually want to enable innovation that helps patients, but they have a critical mandate to ensure safety and efficacy. Proactive engagement helps them understand your approach, provide guidance, anticipate potential hurdles, and ultimately, it can really streamline the path to qualification or approval. The SV95C journey is a perfect example of that iterative collaboration paying off.
Okay, those 5 recommendations seem like a solid foundation. Did the source simplify it even further? Maybe a checklist.
It did offer a simplified 5-step checklist, kind of a practical roadmap.
Step 1.
Concept definition. What are you measuring? Why is it important?
Step 2.
Digital health technology, DHT selection. Which specific wearable, sensor, platform? Why is it the right tool?
Step 3.
MCT estimation. Deriving that meaningful change threshold using the triangulation approach, anchor, distribution, consensus.
Step 4.
Validation, both analytical, tech performance, and clinical patient relevance and sensitivity. The V3 piece.
And step 5.
Regulatory package assembly. Putting all that rigorous data and evidence together meticulously, anticipating questions, building the case for acceptance, and engaging with regulators.
That's a really clear, actionable checklist. It kind of demystifies a complex process.
Exactly. It provides a structured approach for anyone developing a new digital endpoint, guiding them from the initial idea right through to regulatory submission.
So wrapping this all up, what does this really mean for you, the listener, and maybe for the future of medicine more broadly?
Well, it means there's now a clear, proven pathway for turning exciting, cutting-edge technology into genuinely life-changing medical tools.
It's not just theoretical anymore.
Not at all. SV95C is the tangible example, the real-world success story that proves the concept. It shows it can be done.
And it sets a powerful precedent, as you said.
A very powerful one. The whole journey of SV95C, from just an exploratory idea to an EMA-qualified primary efficacy endpoint, it really demonstrates the power of doing things right. Meaning well-executed analytical validation, robust clinical correlation showing it measures something important, thoughtfully derived, meaningful change thresholds grounded in patient experience, and all of it supported by that proactive, sustained regulatory engagement.
It provides a blueprint for what's possible.
Exactly. Not just in DMD, but potentially across countless other conditions where getting precise, objective, real-world measurements could absolutely transform patient care and speed up drug development.
So this deep dive, while focused on the SV95C case study, wasn't just about Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
No, that case study is incredibly important and inspiring, but the principles are broader.
It was really about the fundamentals of how we measure health and disease in this rapidly evolving digital age.
Right. Hopefully you've gained a shortcut to being well-informed on a truly cutting-edge topic.
Understanding how that mix of scientific rigor, patient-centered design, and persistent regulatory dialogue is literally changing the medical landscape.
Opening up possibilities that, frankly, seemed like science fiction not that long ago.
So as we finish up, maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to consider.
If this continuous real-world data from wearables can become the gold standard for measuring drug effectiveness in complex conditions like DMD, what other aspects of our health, our daily lives, could be monitored and understood with this kind of unprecedented precision?
What could that mean?
Think about personalized medicine, truly personalized, where treatments aren't just tailored to your general condition, but maybe to your minute-by-minute physiological reality. Imagine therapies adjusting in real time based on data from your own body's responses.
That sounds futuristic, but maybe not that far off now.
Or what about proactive health management? Could potential health issues be flagged by your own devices, subtly detecting changes in your everyday patterns long before you even notice symptoms?
Allowing for super early intervention.
Potentially, yeah, before things become serious. And ultimately, what might all this mean for the very definition of feeling well or being healthy?
Moving beyond just not feeling sick.
Maybe moving beyond just episodic checkups to a state of continuous data-driven insight that paints a far richer, more complete, and more dynamic picture of our individual well-being.
So the question for you to ponder is, how will you use this insight, this understanding of digital endpoints and meaningful change, to look at that intersection of technology and health differently from